The fourth panel then, the final one of the conference, is on Jenny Diski and writing, and it's going to be chaired by David Browner, whom I'm delighted to introduce. He's a professor of contemporary literature at the University of Reading, and he's a leading figure in the study of modern Jewish fiction and American literature. He's written books, for instance, on Philip Roth and Howard Jacobson, and he's a co-editor of the Edinburgh Companion to Modern Jewish Fiction. He's also taught and written on graphic novels, which, as you'll see, is another reason why he's a perfect chair for this panel. So I'll hand it over to you then, David. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ben. And before I introduce our first speaker, just to reiterate what I was saying to Ben a few minutes earlier, just really to thank Ben again. I know other people have done it, but to thank him for organising this conference. It's really just been undiluted pleasure, I have to say. I've just loved every minute of it, and all the papers, without exception, have been terrific. And it's just, it's just been great to kind of share the love for Diski. It's been really great. So, and thanks for asking me to chair this closing panel. It's a privilege. So we've got two great speakers. I will introduce them. I will introduce the first of them now, and then we will hear his talk, and then I'll introduce the second speaker after that, as has been the custom all the way through. Our first speaker for this session is, if I can get it up, here we go. Yeah, Gerd Bayer. And Gerd teaches English literature and culture at the University of Erlangen in Germany. In an earlier millennium, he wrote his MA thesis on works by Jenny Diski and Jane Rogers. And his other research interests include early modern prose fiction, Holocaust studies, and heavy metal culture. He is currently finishing an edited volume on the ethics of survival for Palgrave, to which he has contributed an essay on Diski's ingratitude. I think without further ado, I will ask Gerd to take it away.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Also, great thanks to Ben for thinking of running this conference, for putting it into place, and for running this so efficiently and so wonderfully. I'm very grateful to be part of this. So my paper, the title hasn't changed: The Unapologetic Writer, Jenny Diski, Michel, Montaigne, and Marie de Gournay. I'll try and keep to 20 minutes. It's a posthumous conference, a way of looking back over a career of a writer whose first novel, Nothing Natural, was published 35 years ago, at a moment in time when somebody who is even a seasoned PhD student of English in 2021 would hardly have read it. Yet here we are, speaking about Jenny Diski, her work, her legacy. When Ingratitude was released in 2016, already 5 years in the past, its author was no longer alive to celebrate it. But while she did not survive her illness, her book certainly did. A conference on a writer no longer alive is a way of engaging in matters of survival. In one of his last interviews, Jacques Derrida, at that point also battling cancer in what he knew was a failing effort, reflected on what it means to live and to survive. He pondered the distinct temporalities, on the one hand, of having survived a past crisis, and on the other, of envisioning a demand to keep on living that results from such a moment. A process, approach to life he describes as survivance. Derrida clearly draws on earlier reflections on the question of survival and writing undertaken by Walter Benjamin, who found cause for hope in the various prefixes one can attach to the German verb leben, to live. In writing about what potentially happens to the legacy of an artist after his or her death, Benjamin contends that Nachleben, a living that takes place after living, extends the life of art beyond the eventual demise of the artist. It is this view of literature as a possible pathway beyond physical existence that I would like to pursue in my presentation on Jenny Diski's book about Michel Montaigne, in Marie de Gournay. In this historical novel, Apology for the Woman Writing, Diski comes closest to offering her thoughts on what literature does, what it means to her, and what it allows us as readers to take away from it. This novel, her last and final foray into the world of narrative fiction, provides not only a capstone to an impressive career that from its outset had always hovered between the factual and the fictional, it also reveals Diski as a firm believer in the power of art to transcend, to uplift, and to outlast reality. While Diski's survival, her Nachleben, as an artist will surely rely to some degree also on her autobiographical and essayistic writing, alongside her travelogues, it is in her thinly veiled own Apologia pro vita sua, her novel about her alter ego Marie, that her sense of literature comes to full fruition. Ever since the publication of Skating to Antarctica, Diski has been viewed largely as a memoirist and life writer, somebody whose work draws more or less factually on her own biographical real-world experiences. It is in this form of writing that her legacy is often seen to rest. It is here that her literature will survive. Having started as a writer of fiction, Diski nevertheless is also a narrator of great force. And in this presentation, I would like to concentrate on her last novel as a means of finding out what, for Diski, is at stake when literature addresses not merely the personal and individual, but when it transcends beyond the idiosyncratic and takes on a lasting quality. In other words, I would like to encourage readers of Diski's nonfiction to read her Apology also as a commentary on nonfiction writing. Apology for the Woman Writing starts tellingly with the protagonist dying. Readers encounter Marie de Gournay, and at this point I need to remember to share my screen, which I'm doing right now. Hopefully. Here we go. Readers encounter Marie de Gournay, first on her deathbed, painfully breathing and floating in and out of consciousness. There her mistress lies in the bed, gasping like a fish, sucking at the air of the world with those dried up lips, dragging it in, trying to fill her rusty lungs. The present tense of this opening passage, using figural focalization, marks an exception to the heterodiegetic narrative that makes up for the bulk of the book, and yet it provides for direct and intimate opening into this highly personal novel. The patient in the scene is tenderly looked after by her companion, Nicole Jamin, a woman who officially works as a servant, but has long moved into the role of confidant and even half-closeted lover. The relationship between the two women is based in almost equal parts in a physical and intellectual fascination, albeit one lacking a mutual form of exchange. And it is this somewhat strained nexus between the life of the mind and the physical pleasure connected to it that not only surfaces in much of Diski's writing, but that furthermore gestures towards her own fascination. One could even call it a sapiosexual fetish, afforded to the power of art, aesthetics, and the output of creative intellectual labor. In Diski's writing and thinking, it is the mind that affects the body. It is easy to read this opening scene of a dying writer concerned about her legacy as a parallel. After all, Apology for the Woman Writing is built around the notion of the doppelganger, of Marie following in the footsteps of Michel, of Jamin secretly admiring Marie. All view their literary selves as their true existence, finding in writing, reading, and in literature a heightened sense of existence, one they're willing to place above and beyond mere corporeal living. The combination between printed words and physical responses already puts in an appearance when Marie first reads Montaigne's essays and falls into a swoon, revealing a psychosomatic tendency to embody her intellectual excitement. a tendency that would later cause her to self-harm when she meets her idolized literary hero for the first time, and one that will inspire her servant to sneak into bed with her mistress. As an accomplished essayist and as a writer who has never shied away from revealing her most intimate thoughts and feelings to her readers, Diski must have felt almost naturally attracted to Montaigne, who for good reasons is considered the inventor of the literary essay, a form of writing that sets out, or one could say attempts, to capture an insight about life or humanity by starting with the personal and idiosyncratic. It is true for Montaigne and for Diski that any writing about the personal is never seen as mere memoir, as a way of saying something about oneself. It is always in the service of attaining a more general truth and literary form of revelation. It is only fitting then that in this novel, Diski extensively evokes the actual physicality of the book, of writing as something that involves the body, corporeality. Readers encounter the smell of books, their texture, the way they touch us, both physically and intellectually. And it is fully in character that the novel includes a facsimile reproduction of Marie's handwritten annotations in the margins of Montaigne's work. The work, while possibly counting as a historical novel, really is an experiment about the life of the mind as it exists in physical reality, of breathing books and thoughts, of making of thoughts a physical experience. It frequently connects these cerebral processes with the pleasures that the visceral body can go through, at times caused by the mind, by reading, by thinking. As we read what Diski writes for us about how Gournay read what Montaigne wrote, we encounter a direct link between body and mind. Reading and writing become invested with the power of transformation, turning the process of literary exchange into an almost Catholic act of metempsychosis that transforms the recipient, as does an experience of religious ecstasy or epiphany. The intimacy, this is Gournay writing in Diski's novel, the intimacy of his confessions, no, not confessions, simply his unapologetic descriptions of himself, his thoughts, his person, his foundering, his conviction, came to her as if he were whispering directly into her ear about what it was like to be a human being. Gournay consumes Montaigne's writing, ingests it physically, actually while reading it with her eyes, but perceived as if the words were entering her through her ears. This occurs on various layers of diegesis. Marie is excited by Montaigne's essay. Jamine becomes aroused when secretly reading her mistress's work, and we are maybe also affected by Diski's novel. This focus on the sensual nature of literary reception is simultaneously connected in the passage just quoted to two further aspects. One is a link to the essence of what is here called a human being, and thus gestures towards what makes Homo sapiens a somewhat different entity than other beings. And the other is the fact that for Montaigne, to engage in such an intimate relationship with both himself and his readers is described as lacking a need to apologize for the honesty involved in such consumption. The fact that he is labeled as an unapologetic writer bestows on him the highest possible honor, namely that of honesty and veracity. To write, in the minds of both Diski and her recreation of de Gournay, is to face the world, to confront reality, to reflect on it directly, openly, and personally. To engage in this practice is to contribute to a general sense of understanding, to add a piece of the puzzle as we face the complexity of life. While such unfiltered honesty, frequently going against powerful conventions and discursive force, will not always be pleasant, it warrants respect. It is out of such thinking that Marie praises Montaigne for being an unapologetic writer, and it is through this mark of honor that Diski shows her sense of what the place and role of thinking and writing are both within the Republic of Letters and human culture at large. It is only fitting, therefore, that de Gournay chooses to address Montaigne through writing. She does not at first seek to meet him, but composes a letter addressed to him. Writing and communicating through textual form is not merely a necessity in the early modern context in which Diski sets her novel. It is furthermore an admission that thinking requires writing, that any thought can benefit from being edited, reworked, clarified. De Gournay invests time and effort in the composition of her own letter to Montaigne, aiming for both perfection and clarity. Her anxiety about falling short as a writer are palpably present. Each word she inked onto the paper narrowed down a little more the infinite possibilities of what she might say. While writing is thus presented as a reduction and compression, it is nevertheless also the path toward clarity and ultimately towards communication. De Gournay is furthermore more than aware that if she leaves Montaigne time to respond, as he will have, if not addressed in person at what might be an unfortunate moment, then her chances of receiving a response clearly increase. Their epistolary exchange takes place from within solitary forms of composition. Diski's Gournay also reveals an uncanny awareness of what in the 21st century we would discuss as psychosomatic effects, namely the way in which the body of a patient can suffer out of causes that are predominantly located in the mental or psychological makeup of the person affected. In discussing Montaigne's precarious well-being at one point, she notes, "He was left utterly depleted, physically weak, and dangerously vulnerable to the melancholia that had always threatened to corrupt his carefully nurtured but fragile, balanced temperament." The comments are not unusual for a time in which bodily humors were seen as the prime cause for overall health, and a reference to melancholia explicitly mentions one of the four galenic body fluids. And yet the passage reads almost prophetic in the way in which it links body and mind. For a writer in particular, existence appears to hinge on the person's ability to express his or her feelings through their writing. And if that flow is somehow blocked, the body of the artist will, as a result, betray symptoms of illness. In his introduction to the actual novel written by de Gournay, The Promenade, also mentioned in Diski's novel, Richard Hillman quotes the Renaissance writer's recollection of that famous first encounter with Montaigne's writing. "They were ready to give me hellebore, traditionally a remedy against madness, sentenced to ecstasy as I was when the essays were fortuitously put into my hands at the point when I was leaving childhood behind." Hillman's gloss on the historical use of hellebore testifies both to the overall impact that the book had on its reader and to the link that existed between how Gournay reacted in both body and mind to the text. Hillman's collection and translation of de Gournay's writing bears the same title as Diski's novel, and both seem to use the notion of the apology as a way of commenting on the scandalous nature that attached and somehow still attaches to the idea of a writerly life, in particular if and when the writer in question is a woman writer. And here we can see Diski as continuing a tradition that runs from Aphra Behn to Virginia Woolf, also including Doris Lessing. But even if we step back from the gendered nature of this complaint and thereby undermine the gender politics of perceived roles of authorship, what remains is the nexus between the life of the mind as a fulfilling and satisfying approach to existence, even when that existence appears as nothing natural to others. And if we take Diski's writing at large, in particular including travel writing and her own essays, then writing does indeed take on a dimension that sets out to bridge the gap between a mere intellectual endeavor and the physical well-being that can, under ideal circumstances, result from it. Diski's novel, in a peculiar way, does not have an ending. Apology does not. not only does the narrative circle back in its closing section to its opening pages, set in 1645 during the final days of Marie de Gournay's life, and as such invites readers to ponder the circularity of time. It also ends with the death of a writer who is actively resurrected by Diski's novel. Like the second life that was breathed into Salieri's reputation by Peter Schaffer's play Amadeus, Diski's novel extends the lifespan of de Gournay, the Renaissance woman. By raising her from oblivion, by keeping her memory alive, Diski circumvents the finality of death and dying. With her apology for the woman writing, she contributes to the survival of de Gournay, whose own life was devoted to keeping Montaigne's legacy alive. In this continuation of life beyond survival, in this Nachleben, Diski attests to the force of writing, to the potentiality that attaches to the printed word, the physicality of the book. In its closing pages, the novel directly evokes this duality of life beyond death that can be achieved by artists. With the novel's focalization again shifting to Jamine, de Gournay's servant and companion, the take on the early modern writer becomes historicized and externalized. It is then only Jamine's view of her mistress that speaks through these closing pages. Yet the attitude nevertheless gives voice to the perceived opinions of Marie de Gournay. Sitting at the bedside of a dying employer, Jamine reflects on the ghostly existence of the dying writer. Astonishing how the old hag hangs on. She's trying to outlast her own death, in all likelihood, in order to read the tributes to her life and work. It's a bitter irony that she of all people cannot see the honeyed words they will fashion, even those who sneer for the sake of form and to signal their familiarity with the worth of the great Montaigne. Those are precisely the words she has been waiting for all her life. But even she can't survive her own death. Not even La Demoiselle, with her determination and self-blinding confidence, with her stubborn refusal to know what there is to know. Unless, of course, that is exactly the condition of ghosts, stubborn fools who can't accept the truth of the end of themselves and think that they have cheated death. In these closing pages, the novel explicitly evokes, albeit in a ghostly manner, the question of survival, of what happens with a writer after his or her death. Jorge Luis Borges has wittily addressed his own duality of existence in an essayistic prose text called Borges y Yo, Borges and I, differentiating between his biological life and his existence in the minds of his readers. It is this survival that Diski's novel, which ended up being her last novel, addresses by way of an early modern writer whose legacy continues to be attached to that of another writer. This kind of linkage also surfaces in Diski's last book, Ingratitude, in the way that Diski relates her own life to that of Doris Lessing, the Nobel Prize recipient whose work bears various traces of Diski's own biography and the way in which both of their lives were intertwined. Read together, these two books take shape as a form of apology that is part admittance and part atonement. From both works, Diski emerges as a thinker who takes seriously the power of the word and who stands in awe of both the manner in which great writing will outlast its creators and the fact that she herself must have known that membership in that elite club of artists who survive is always precarious. If we want to identify one similarity between the two writers, Lessing and Diski, then we could point to their shared willingness not to shy away from turning the personal into the literary, from taking a biographical take on reality that builds on personal experience and is willing in the sense developed first, maybe by Michel Montaigne, to reveal oneself in an attempt to create truthful insights. Thank you.